Assalamu alaikum. Welcome to another podcast. Welcome, Dr Omer Atilla Ergi.
Hello, Dr. Zuleyha. How are you?
Good, good. Now, we've got a very interesting topic today, and it's something that I think everyone has thought at some point because it's to do with, eternal life. And the question is about, what will happen to non-Muslims in the afterlife? Is it only believers that will go to heaven? And there's big implications for that.
Yes. I think a lot of Muslims think about this and they probably bite their tongues most of the time. Don't say anything about it.
They don't want to say it because it sounds provocative, but it's a good question.
Yes, it is a good question and valid question, and I think it should be talked about. And we can look at all the classical views in regards to this, also the Quran and Hadith, of course, that's our main sources. But maybe it's good to start with the verse, وَمَا خَلَقْتُ الْجِنَّ وَالْإِنسَ إِلَّا لِيَعْبُدُونَ. So human beings, we are here to acknowledge Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, God Almighty, and of course to worship Him. But as you can see, it's always, if you look at all the verses in the Quran, Iman always comes before, amal. Iman is the first thing. Without Iman, nothing has value. And amal, practice, is the manifestation of Iman anyway. And also, maybe this is very important as well here, light and darkness cannot occupy the same space. It is a physics principle. So if someone has Iman, even if it's in the weight of an atom, they have Iman, because the two things cannot occupy the same heart. Therefore, in regards to what will happen to others, other than Muslims,
especially, can I say, in a world where we were born into a Muslim family, so we might feel like we were privileged, or we have an advantage. And sometimes you might think, well, what if I was born into a family that's not Muslim? Does that mean I'm disadvantaged?
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, first of all, being born to a Muslim family is not really an advantage. It's not a privilege, because there are no guarantees. We should know that, because it's all up to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But there's something that I always repeat in regards to this. This is Islamic creed, Ahlul Sunnah wal Jamaat, the mainstream creed. And that is, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala Almighty is all-merciful, all-compassionate. And no one should form a barrier in front of His rahmah. Therefore, we don't have the authority to decide who will go to Jannah, who will go to Jahannam. We don't have that kind of authority. We are not the gatekeepers of hell or heaven. We don't make these decisions. We have what we call wazifa, duty, as believers. But we don't interfere in the wazifa of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We call it, wazifa ilahi. That's His thing. We don't get interfere in that. Therefore, it is very hard to speak on matters like this, who will go to Jannah, who will go to Jahannam. But throughout history, Islamic scholars, in particular creed scholars, aqeedah scholars, have, discussed this topic. And they came up with a number of different solutions. But I'll tell you something very interesting. If you look at the Quran, you can look at all the verses in the Quran. The only people that the Quran talks about going to eternal hell is the people who disbelieve completely. It's either the mushriks, people who assign partners to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, say that there are more than one God, polytheists, and people who are munafiqs, they say they believe but they don't truly believe, and people who deny Allah altogether, deny God altogether. Other than that, we don't see the Quran talking about people going to eternal hell forever, or eternal hell. We don't see it anyway in any verse in the Quran. So that's the only, maybe we can think of that as a benchmark, because we can only say what the Quran says. We cannot make up things. But I know that I see many people, on YouTube too. People, some of them who are considered as sheikhs, they come up and they wave their fingers and they say, you're going to hell, Jahannam. This is not our duty. We don't do that. The Prophet never did that. So when we look at it from an academic perspective, and if we go back and analyze the views of all the classical scholars, I can tell you that there are maybe within the mainstream, Ahl Sunnat wal Jamaat, there are three major groups, we can say, in aqeedah. Two of them are, Maturidis and the Asharis, and the other ones mainly is followed by either the Hanbalis or the Salafi view of today, which consists of about 10% of the Muslim world.
Right.
There are about 2 billion Muslims in the world, and majority either follows the Ashari view or the Maturidi view. But most people don't even know what the Ashari view and the Maturidi view is.
Grew up in that sort of.
Maybe it's good to inform them about this. Majority doesn't know about these things. So people who follow certain schools of thought in fiqh, Islamic jurisprudence, if they are following generally Imam Abu Hanifa in practical issues, they are usually in the view of Maturidi in regards to creed of Islam. If they are following, Maliki or Shafi, they are usually following the Ashari view. Abu Hassan al-Ashari, very famous,
so just even at madhab, like I know some people, you ask them what madhab do you belong to, even with that sometimes people don't know, but it's obviously been, the way they practice their religion has been influenced by a madhab, because the way they do their 5 daily prayers and that it's there. So everyone, most people practicing, maybe everyone who practices, they're actually maybe not even knowingly following a madhab, and therefore in a theological school as well. Exactly.
Very good point. Because, look, I'll tell you one fact. No one can practice Islam without Sunnah.
Yeah.
You cannot just take the Quran and practice Islam, because Quran doesn't go into details in regards to, amal, in regards to actions. So the Quran is mainly based on, belief matters. Theology, maybe 95% of the Quran is based on theology. There are practical matters in the Quran, but very briefly explained. Like the Quran won't explain to you the rakats of, the daily prayers, how many rakats you should
recite, what will annul your salat or your wudu. It doesn't talk about those details.
Yes, exactly. And when it comes to, Sunnah, again, to understand the Sunnah, we need scholars.
Yeah.
That is why throughout Islamic history we have all these very famous scholars that came and gone. And this is exactly the same thing when it comes to aqeedah, the creedal matters, theology. So we do have all these scholars came throughout the history. And we know at one time of Islamic history, which we think the end of sort of formative era, which ends with Imam Maturidi. And we see that it became a discipline. Islamic theology, creed became a discipline within Islam. And if you look at these things, which some people do as bid'ah,
theology is bid'ah?
Some people think, approach it as bid'ah, and they say we just follow the Quran and Sunnah, and they disregard all this scholarly work for, 1,200 years. And if you consider it as like that, then you need to, just do not accept or deny all the disciplines of Islam. Usul al-fiqh, usul al-tafsir, usul al-hadith, usul al-din, all of them you need to deny, which all Muslim world has accepted these things. So in regards to these schools, as I said, majority of the world Muslim population, some of them may not even know, like you said, in Aqeedah they either follow Maturidi or Ashari, and the others are generally Atharis. We call them Athari. They go back to the creed of Ahmed bin Hanbal. And today we have the Salafi groups, which sort of always use reference as Ibn Taymiyyah or Ibn Qayyim. Whenever they talk about a matter, they will always go back and reference Ibn Taymiyyah, Shaykhul Islam Ibn Taymiyyah.
Okay, so we've got the Ashari, Maturidi, and Athari.
Generally. And Hanbalis usually follow that Athari creed, which goes back to Imam Ahmed bin Hanbal. And they are more of the Ahl al-Hadith tradition, if we look at Islamic history. And the rest is Ahl al-Ray. which means Ahl al-Hadith takes everything literally, refrains from interpreting anything, no ta'wil, generally.
Right.
And the other schools, Maturidi and Ashari, they lean towards interpretations if there is a necessity there, such as, for example, Yadullah, the hand of Allah. The Quran says you cannot take that verse as literally that Allah having physical hands. So it needs interpretation.
So Athari would understand that as a physical hand?
They would not understand as physical hand, but they would say, we accept the Quranic verse as it is, we don't interpret.
Right. Okay.
So they approach it from that perspective. They don't go into interpretations. Even Imam Abu Hanifa was in a similar view. We call it tafweed. He said, these are sifats, like the hand of Allah, without interpretation. Their modality is unknown. So he uses the term bila kayf. We don't know their modality, but they are sifat, attributes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So when we come to matters like, what will happen to, non-Muslims?
Yes.
Again, they have developed these different views in regards to this. And when we look at the Ashari school, it is even much more flexible in regards to this.
So that would be the most flexible, Ashari?
Most flexible, definitely.
And then Maturidi and the Athari.
Yeah.
That's the spectrum, huh?
Yeah, because Ashari say, based on the verse in the Quran, we will not punish those whom we have not sent a prophet to. So what does that mean? It means that if there is no conveyance, there is no prophet, people are not responsible. That's what it means. And they take that verse as a benchmark. And they say that if the message has not reached someone, they are not responsible of belief or actions. This is the Ashari view. Not belief either. They're not responsible of.
Because revelation, they believe that you need to have had revelation to be able to believe in God.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So it needs to reach them somehow. So they are much more flexible. But Imam Ashari himself went to the extent that even if they are mushrik. But all the Ashari scholars who followed him did not accept it.
The mushrik's part?
Yeah, they did not accept because they said all the mushriks that lived at the time of Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, even before him, will go to Jahannam. That was their view. So Imam Ashari was alone in this view himself. However, Maturidis are different in regards to this. Their view are different. Abu Mansur al-Maturidi, he said that all human beings have intellect. Allah has given them this unique gift. Therefore, they are responsible of finding God themselves using their intellect. And they are able to do this. And he provides some examples from Ibrahim alayhi salam. Abraham in the Quran, he looks at the moon, the stars, he starts, using logic there. And the Quran encourages people to use logic. So from a faith perspective, Imam Maturidi said, yes, you have intellect. Therefore, you can discover God yourself with your reasoning. And you are responsible of knowing that there is a creator. Because there is enough intellect to do that.
So let's create a scenario. So I'm in an island, there's nothing, just me. So according to Ashari, if I don't believe in God, because I've got no access to anything, I'm safe.
Yes.
Whereas according to Maturidi, I have the intellect and I should be able to understand and work out that there is a creator.
Yes, exactly. And according to Maturidis, you don't need to know the details. You don't need to say God is Allah. You can't know those details, but you can figure out by looking at the nature, the universe. You can say this is a perfect design here. There's perfect functionality. There must be a designer, there must be a creator. That is sufficient according to Maturidis, but he says they cannot be responsible of amal, actions, because without a prophet or revelation, they cannot know the amal side of things, the action, the obligatory act side of things. That's why he says, he takes that part out of it, responsibility, and he says, but faith part, you are still responsible. However, there's another interesting thing there that maybe I should add. And that is, when we look at Iman, who is responsible of Iman? You know, like faith, belief in Islam, who is responsible? There are certain conditions there. The first thing is they have to be sane, yeah?
Yeah.
That's sound mind,
That's
because
right.
people who don't have sanity, they cannot be responsible. The second thing is the message has to reach them.
Right.
Because if someone does not know something, how can they be actually fully responsible of it? And this is the reason why Maturidi said, you know, they cannot be responsible of practical things or the details of Iman, faith, but they will still be responsible of at least coming to the conclusion, you know, that there's some sort of a creator.
A higher being.
A higher being, a supreme being, like you said. However, I love the way Imam Ghazzali comes into the picture, and he has this unique, you know, interpretation of this. And he says they are in 3 different categories.
The non-believers?
Yeah, he puts them into 3 different categories. And he says the first category is this, you know, if the message has not reached them, they are in salvation. They can go to Jannah.
So Imam Ghazzali was Ashari?
Ashari, he was Ashari.
Yeah.
But of course, you know, they still need to have some sort of a faith, you know, a creator or something like that. But they could be Christians, Jews, or some other thing, as long as they have some sort of belief in God, creator. But if the message of Islam hasn't reached them...
What if nothing has reached them, though?
If nothing reached them, then they'll go back to Asharis, because Ghazali is an Ashari. Then they will not be responsible. So he says they will not be responsible, therefore they can go to Jannah. Of course, we use always the possibilities, because it's Allah who makes the decision. The second category, he says, the message has reached them, but in a distorted way. Not the way it should reach them. And today we know how things are.
And the reality is that happened throughout history as well. It's not a new phenomena. So even obviously it happened during Imam Ghazali's time for him to even think of this category.
Yes,
right?
of course, you know. People may have heard about Islam in Byzantium, in various countries, but it's not really the conveyance, the pure message has not really reached them. They just heard about Islam. It's a different thing. They would still be considered people of fatra. So he says if the message reached them, but in a distorted way, they can still reach salvation. This is the Imam Ghazali's view. The only category, the third one, he says the message has reached them in all of its purity. It has been conveyed to them and they rejected it. That's the group that will not be saved. You know, they won't reach salvation. And this is Imam Ghazali's view. But at the end of the day, you know, my view is this, you know, as I said, we are not the gatekeepers of heaven or hell. And our noble Prophet ﷺ in a hadith says, Man qala la ilaha illallah dakhala al-jannah. You know, whoever says God is one, God Almighty is one, they will enter Jannah. Of course, entering Jannah, people may, you know, get the wrong idea about this too. You know, if people are bad, they did evil things, they harmed others, they stole, and various, you know, bad acts they committed, they will still be held accountable for that. We are talking about eternal Jannah, or eternal hell. So if someone has an atom's weight of belief in their heart, you know, my view is at the end they will certainly enter paradise. You know, it's my view. But no one can form a barrier to the rahmat, the eternal compassion of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This is not possible. This is my view. And another thing that I should say, just an analogy, you know. Let us say we are on the day of judgment, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says to one of his servants there, all human beings are his servants, and says, enter my paradise. Can anyone stand up there, even the greatest sheikhs in the world, and say, what are you doing? Hasha. You can't put him in paradise. You know, he was such and such. And Allah will say, he's my servant. Who are you? You know, you don't have that authority. So it is not up to us to decide who goes to Jannah, who goes to Jahannam, when even we don't know ourselves, you know, are we guaranteed? Just because we're Muslim, it doesn't mean we're entering paradise. You know, we don't even know our own hearts. Allah knows our hearts better than us.
That's true. And I guess even saying La ilaha illallah, we might say it, but are we saying it with our heart, which is the most important thing? But I guess, when people say, if you do this, you'll go to hell, sometimes they're basing it on Quranic verses or hadith. But it's, I guess the challenge with that is you're giving an absolute judgment to someone.
That's very risky.
Which is very risky. Because that person may repent, or based on their circumstances, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala might, evaluate according to their circumstances. There's always exceptions to the rule. We don't know.
That's a very interesting, because I remember an incident many, many years ago when I was overseas in Turkey. There were some different political groups. One of them was like they used to support communism. They used to side with Russia. They used to actually get cans of paints and write on the walls a lot, graffiti, things like that. One day, this Imam at the mosque, he was giving a sermon, and he was talking about these people who write on the walls with, things with graffiti and things like that. And he was saying, "You will all go to hell like this." And then after the sermon, one young person approached him, and he said, "Hojam, if I died a week ago, I would be within those group of people who will go to hell." He said, "You shouldn't be saying things like that. How do you know? How do you know who's going to go hell? Allah is the owner of the hearts. That's why we say, Ya muqallib al-qulub, sabbit qalbi ala dinik, keep us our heart on the path of religion." So we should not, make judgments on other people. We don't know what's in their hearts. You know that Maturidi has a very interesting thing, Imam Maturidi, in regards to, what is Iman. As you know, the basic condition is kalima shahada. One has to accept that Allah is one, and Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him, is his messenger. That's the basic condition. Now, and they say, what is the definition of Iman? It's utterance with the tongue and confirmation with the heart. It's ikrar and tasdik. But Imam Maturidi says the ikrar part, to utter with the tongue, is a condition for other people to accept you as a believer.
Oh, okay.
But he says the rukun, integral part of Iman, is confirmation with the heart, and that's to do with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So he says, even if there is no utterance, which is possible, if someone could be stranded on a desert island by themselves, they believe, in Allah. There's no one to, confirm their belief, but Allah knows their hearts. So Imam Maturidi says that the rukun is confirmation with the heart. And for us, we cannot go and open people's hearts and look into it. This person is munafiq, this person is believer. That is, even the Prophet did not know who the munafiqs are in Medina until it was revealed to him. He didn't know.
Even then, he didn't treat them otherwise until if it corrupted society.
Yes, exactly.
Because that would have been a precedence for others, like, if you think someone's a munafiq, you do something. But I guess just with that, going back to that point, some people will say, yes, but what if someone says, example, there's no salah in the Quran, or there was another messenger after Muhammad. What I guess is the point here that we should get out of the habit of saying you're going to hell.
Exactly. We shouldn't label anyone as kafirs or, we can label them as believers because we know when they, confirm that they believe. But we shouldn't label anyone as kafir. However, of course, when you look at the Quranic verses, I said Quranic verses, this belief is, defined very clearly. Like, for example, the Quran mentions all the conditions of belief, which are mainly the 6 essential articles of Islam, when we recite Amantu Billahi, they are all necessary conditions of belief in Islam. However, there are certain things attached to them. Normally, Iman and amal are 2 different things. Iman and actions are 2 different things. However, according to Imam Abu Hanifa, they are inseparable. They are like the front and the back of a person. You cannot separate them. However, they are technically different things. That's why in the Jibril hadith, when Jibril asked Prophet Muhammad ﷺ to define Islam, he talks about the 5 pillars of Islam. When he asks him about Iman, he talks about the 6 articles of Iman.
Yeah.
They are technically different things. Amal and Iman only comes together, or there is a connection, when someone, like you said, denies an action which is mentioned in the Quran. So if someone says there is no salah, like you said, then they are indirectly really denying the Quran, because the Quran says, aqimus salah. So you are denying the Quran. That means you're negating one of the condition of the 6 essential articles. So denial or lack of practice are 2 different things.
Yes.
People confuse that too. When someone doesn't pray or neglects a prayer, they accuse them of straight away kufr. You can't make takfir on people. They could be lazy, they could be...
For sure, yeah. Practices for sure. And I guess even when there are things like, if someone says, I don't believe that you need to pray 5 times a day, rather than say, brother, you're a kafir now, you're going to hellfire. Like if we just reworded that and saying, this is in the Quran, and you believe the Quran is the word of God, like even just the way we articulate it to that person can make a big difference.
A big difference.
Yeah.
Absolutely, because if you just have to look at the life of Prophet Muhammad ﷺ. He was in 2 folds. Why aren't they believing? He was suffering because they're not believing. He didn't say, oh, kafir to Abu Jahl, or this just walked away. There are some reports he knocked on the door of Abu Jahl 100 times. People used to spit on his noble face. One scholar says the amount of spits that were thrown on his face, it could fill up a bucket. You can take wudu with it. This is our noble Prophet, ﷺ, the beloved of Allah. He went again to their house. He went again to their...
He did put a cross on them and said, that's it, you're
kafir.
You're kafir, no hope. He actually made dua, like even for one of the Omars to become Muslim. And that was after Abu Jahl did all that he did. Right?
Yes,
exactly. But yet he was still thinking, if he becomes Muslim, he's thinking about what it means for the Ummah.
Exactly.
Rather than getting all heated up and saying, oh, that's it, I want nothing to do with you.
And Taif too, isn't it? When he went to Taif, all the things that they did to him, they stoned him, blood was rushing from his head. And according to one narration, Jibreel came with this angel, and he said, oh Muhammad, this angel is the first time coming to earth. He is here to destroy Taif with one command. Allah said, if you command, he will destroy Taif. What did he say? No. Maybe in the future one of them might believe that this is shafqat, this is compassion, mercy. That's how we should be.
Yeah, I always think of scenarios. I think if it was one of us of today, we'll say, bring it down. Look what they did. And especially like he was hurt. He was very, he describes it as his most painful day or occasion, even more than Uhud. But even then, he didn't allow that to happen.
I think we should be very sensitive with these issues. For example, as I said, Quran clearly defines who is a mushrik, who is a munafiq, who is a kafir. But there are some groups that the Quran describes as Ahli Kitab. The Jews, the Christians, Sabians, and amongst them, some of them may directly deny and reject Islam. That's a different thing, but there must be amongst them, the Quran says, people who do believe in Allah in the Day of Judgment. Maybe they haven't learned about Islam in detail. They don't know that the last prophet is actually Prophet Muhammad ﷺ. And it's not sufficient for people to just hear it on the media.
That's right. And I guess that's what I wanted to ask, because some people say, they'll say, everyone's heard about Islam today. Social media, it's everywhere. No one's got an excuse. But how do they actually hear about, Islam? It's often very negative, like it's in the media, as you said, as people in there, and the way the media portrays them, obviously, they haven't genuinely met a good Muslim, most people.
So that's the second condition of Imam Ghazzali, distorted. They are hearing a distorted version of Islam. Moreover, I think we should put ourselves into the shoes of those people. Let us say you have the media in front of you, you have the computers, internet in front of you. You have a million different views. How do you know which is true? you know. They say they should, research. Which one they're going to research?
Yeah, and they're not. Yeah, which one? And what's the drive? Because they're not starting at zero.
Yes.
They're starting in the red. So,
That's what I mean,
there's
yes.
no drive, and so we have to keep that in mind.
We have to, and as I said, only Allah knows the heart, so we shouldn't make decision on who is going to hell, who is going to heaven. That is Allah's decision. We can just mention what the Quran says. Yes, it's a requirement that we bring the kalima shahada, we believe in Prophet Muhammad as the last prophet, but we shouldn't classify people as kafirs if they don't know about it, if they haven't learned about it. So they may be good people, they may have faith in the Creator, they may lead a good life, they may believe in life after death. So we cannot classify them as kafirs. They're going to Allah. When you think about it, Allah, we say in the Quran, when we recite the Quran, almost every verse starts with Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim, the all-merciful, the all-compassionate. Endless. His mercy is endless, and the mercy that we have, not even like a drop in the ocean, comes from Him, originates from Him. And also Allah has wrath to people who do wrong things, injustice, act in an injustice way, people who harm others. Allah also, because He is just, He will punish them as well. However, that feeling, that sifat is also manifests in us in a very, minimal way. So we shouldn't take the sifats of Allah and argue that we have more of these than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's very ridiculous. So it is Allah who makes the decisions. As I said before, we should never form barriers in front of the rahmat of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So in regards to what will happen to non-Muslims, that's Allah's decision, not our decision.
Maybe we should focus on ourselves more than focusing on others. Be worried about our Iman and how we're going to die, because as you said, we don't have a guarantee as to what our end's going to be.
That's a very good point. That you might see one person and you might say, oh, he's or she's kafir
for saying this,
hell or whatever. May Allah protect us. How do you know that you die as an unbeliever and that person embraces the truth? You don't know.
You don't know. And also, belief is a blessing, and with blessings comes responsibility and accountability. So we should feel that, I guess, and therefore we should be absorbed in our own world and our practices and our belief system, rather than saying you're this, you're that, pointing fingers.
I think that's a very good point. That we should think about ourselves first, and maybe we can end this conversation with a very interesting narration from one of the tabi'in, the highest level of tabi'in. One of them was Hassan Basri, and there was another one, but I can't remember the full kunya. But when he was dying, they regard him as one of the highest level of the tabi'in. Tabi'in are people who have seen the Sahabi, as you know. When he was dying in his deathbed, he was crying, weeping. And his friends were next to him, and they said, "What's wrong? Are you afraid of dying?" He said, "No, I'm not afraid of dying. Well, is it because of your sins? He goes, "No." Then what are you afraid of? He goes, "I'm afraid of dying as a kafir." This is the highest level of the tabi'in. So we should think about this first, about ourselves, instead of judging other people, I think.
They're very true, because the minute you're too much in your comfort zone, it's a danger zone, I feel. The minute, it doesn't mean we should get paranoid, but you have to find that middle ground.
Yes, exactly.
Exactly. Okay, very interesting topic. Thank you, Dr Omer Atilla Ergi. And we look forward to seeing you all next time. Assalamu alaikum.